As soon as I got the news that my wife and I were going to have a son in the Holy Land of Israel, I immediately started dreaming. What if his name was Nachman? And to be honest, it was quite a pipe dream. My wife has shown no interest since we got married that we would ever name our kid Nachman. Not because she has anything against Rebbe Nachman, she actually is quite fond of him. But it just wasn't her taste. And I spent many years praying that one day, B'ezrat Hashem, I would be able to name one of my sons after my Rebbe, the one who has changed my life and the one who has given me life. And Baruch Hashem, thank God, we went out on a date, and during this lunch that we had right beforehand, I had done an hour Hippodaду. I prayed Hashem, I said, I know this is a nace, I know this is a miracle, I know how unlikely this is, but you can do anything. And it would mean so much to me that if our first son in the land of Israel, who Rabbi Nachman was so fond of, who he cherished so much, this land, getting to the land, sacrificing his life to be here, encouraging all of his students to live there, saying the most wondrous things about this place, that I could name my son after Rabbi Nachman. And I believe you can do that. You can do that for me. And I think I cried. And then we went out on a date, and we were sitting there at lunch, and we're talking about maybe names that we can name our son. And we discussed different things. And then my wife said to me, and by the way, I just want to let you know, if you want to give him a second name, and you want his second name to be Nachman, we can do that. And I couldn't believe it. It was like literally an hour before that I was just crying to Hashem that to name my son after my Rebbe, and my wife, who had for half a decade said it would never happen. To see it happen was an amazing, amazing day. And this series is dedicated to my son. And I'm hoping that one day, B'ezrat Hashem, he'll be able to grow up, and when he wants to know why his dad was so adamant, had prayed so hard, even cried that he should be named Nachman, that these classes, these lessons, these stories given over about Rabbi Nachman should make him feel very proud and give him something to aspire to and to be like. This is a series on Chayei Moharan. This was the last book that Rav Natan wrote about his Rebbe, and it was actually his biography, the biography of Rebbe Nachman. And we have never taught a class on Chayei Moharan and Zion Bresla project. It's been something that's been very overwhelming for me to even conceive of, because it's so precious to me and it's so meaningful and it's so big, and the light in this book is so unadulterated and strong that I just kind of shied away from it. But, Rabbi Nachman said Hayom, today. So what I want to do before we even begin the book is I want to speak over a few points, very powerful, very salient, very important points that both the publisher and the translator bring over. And that way we can have this kind of framework with which to move into this book with, because this book is a big light. And if a person doesn't have kelim, doesn't have vessels to receive the light, even though the light might be healing, it might be sweet, it might be illuminating, but if one does not have proper vessels to receive that light can actually damage him. And so I want to give over a few pieces to create some kelim, some vessels, so as we move into this book, B'ezrat Hashem, we'll be able to really see this with clear, pure eyes, and to be able to receive all the beauty and all the blessings that come with learning such an incredible book like this. And to get to know who is Rebbe Nachman, and what is so special about him, what is so unique about him, that I should spend every day learning his books and applying his advice and meditating out in the field and really trying to be alive, like we're going to learn about. To have life in a world which we're going to see in a second, where people appear to be alive, but everyone knows in their own heart that many times this life feels lifeless. And with those words, let's look at this book, okay? Let's look at what Rav Chaim Kramer has to say. He was the publisher of this book. And he begins by speaking about Avram Avinu. We just learned in last week's Parsha that Avram Avinu, actually next week's Parsha, Chayei, which is very fitting considering we're doing Chayei Moharan, speaks about Avram Avinu. It says, Avram was old, advanced with his days, and Hashem blessed Avraham. From the moment that Avram began to recognize Hashem, he constantly strived for greater knowledge of him. For the more he knew, the better he could serve Hashem. Every moment of his life was dedicated to longing for Hashem, searching and seeking for ways to reveal Hashem's presence in the world, both to himself and to others. Thus, when he was old, the Torah says about Avraham, and Avraham was old. Now the Zohar, which illuminates the secrets of the Torah, it's trying to understand why does it say, in addition to the fact that he's old, he was advanced with his days. Just say he's old. Why do you have to say, and he came with his days, he would advance with his days? We know, we got it, he's old, so obviously he lived a lot of days. So the Zohar brings you a very deep window into Avram Avinu, and with this we're going to also be able to understand Rebbe Nachman. And the Zohar says, Avraham was constantly advancing to very great levels with all his days, meaning with every single day accounted for. That is to say that what we're going to learn, what made Rebbe Nachman so unique, one of the things that made him so unique, was the degree to which he lived every moment of his life. Many of us are alive, but we're not necessarily alive in each moment of our life. And obviously in this generation, more than ever, we're seeking how to live a truly good life because we have everything that we need physically. And so therefore, there's no greater precedent, there's no greater importance, there's no greater impetus for us to actually fill our days with true life, because now we have material life and we realize that's not life. So what is real life? This is something that Rebbe Nachman spent every waking moment of his 38 and a half years figuring out, and then giving over to Rav Natan, who gave over to us. Now, Rebbe Nachman speaks about in the 60th lesson of Likutei Moharan, there are people who sleep away their days, and even though they appear to be awake, they're actually sleeping away their whole lives. Every person must seek long life. Attaining this long life comes from extending one's day, bringing greater levels of kedusha, godliness, holiness into each and every day, into each and every hour. Through this, one can attain great wealth and very exalted levels of Torah understanding. What was so unique about Rebbe Nachman that Rav Natan named this book after him, Chayei Moharan, which means the lives of our master. Now you would think it would say the life of my master, but no, it says the lives of my master. Why? Because Rav Natan, there's an oral tradition that he said that my Rebbe, every single time that I saw him, every moment, he was newly alive. He was drawing life new into that moment. He was a chidush. He was a brand new reality at each and every moment, to the extent that Rav Natan said, there's no other person in the world like this person. And Rav Natan was not someone who had never seen people before. He was not a person who was ignorant of great tzaddikim. He himself was the son of a tzaddik, and his father-in-law was a great tzaddik. And he was destined as well to be a great tzaddik in the Lithuanian world before he started searching and yearning and entering into the world of Jewish mysticism. And then he was by all the great Hasidic masters of the generation, even to the extent that he became one of the favorite pupils of who was considered to be the greatest tzaddik of the generation. That was Rav Levi Orberditchev, the guardian of the Jewish people. The only one who actually advocated for Rebbe Nachman in his lifetime, was not only not opposed to him, but actually deeply loved him and encouraged people to be close to him, and would have done so more if there was not such machloket, such dispute about Rebbe Nachman in his life. And yet, with all that being said, Rav Natan says explicitly, we're going to see in this book, there is nobody in the world like Rebbe Nachman. And we need to know, and this is something that's going to come out in the translator's introduction, and that's Avraham Greenberg. He says something that's very important. especially in our generation where we have social media and we have television and we have internet and we have all these different forums and venues to be able to speak, to be able to relate, to be able to give over our experience of things. And when most of those things are actually connected to and rooted back in making money, so then all of a sudden there's a very big impetus to aggrandize things, to make things bigger, right? Instead of the news giving over something that took place in the world as this is just what happened, if you watch that news channel, if you watch that that segment, you might feel at the end either this is the greatest thing that ever happened or the world is coming to an end. Why is it so intense like that? Things did never happen before? There was never news before like this? No, it's always been like that. But it helps the news stations attract viewers if they say things like this. Because then the more viewers they have, the more sponsorships they get, the more money that they make, and that's their goal, right? But then all of a sudden, as well in our life, that we get bored, right? And everybody wants to say that what I have is greater. It's bigger, it's better, whether it's my favorite athlete, my favorite musician, right? It used to be that athletes, they were the greatest, right? They were like, wow, this athlete is unbelievable, right? But then all of a sudden, it went from being the greatest to this person's the king. And then as time went on, it went from this one is like the king, to the extent that they ended up calling Michael Jordan the Black Yeshka, the Black Jesus, right? And lest that be enough, then all of a sudden, now in our generation, every player is labeled the God, the point God, whatever, all different types of appellations, right? And Rebbe Nachman actually, so prescient he was in everything that he speaks about this in the story of the Master of Prayer, where he says there's going to come a time in history where there's going to be a land of wealth. There's going to be a society that everyone is running after money. And his concern was not so much about that, it was more so what that ultimately will lead to, which is that everyone will think that they are God. And that's exactly what's happening, which is scary. And that people who don't have wealth will not be valued in the same way that those who do, right? Bezrat Hashem, one day we're going to get to those stories when we get to those lessons in Sipori Masiot. But suffice it to say that Rabbi Nachman knew that this was coming. So with that being said, Avram Greenberg wants us to know that when Rav Natan speaks about Rabbi Nachman, or when Rabbi Nachman speaks about Rabbi Nachman himself, and you see that there are these very strong statements, very unadulterated, very unbridled, what may appear to be in the language of psychology, very grandiose, right? We need to know that Rav Natan only spoke truth, and that the path of Rabbi Nachman was pure, unadulterated truth, simplicity, authenticity, genuinity. This is the linchpin of Breslov Chassidus. It is that everything that's said, everything which is yearned for, everything that's moved towards, everything that's spoken about is genuine, it's honest, it's truthful, it's real. This is a Breslover Chassid. This is Rabbi Nachman. This is his path. This is the path that he said that our ancestors walked. This is the path that Rabbi Nachman says must be walked again before the coming of the Redeemer of the world, the Mashiach, Tzikenu b'Merav Yameinu, that he should come. And therefore, when we hear these statements that Rabbi Nachman says about himself, even though at first glance we might be taken aback because we never heard someone speak about himself this way, except for people who were really out of their mind or had some type of psychological issues, or was very arrogant. But we have to understand that Rabbi Nachman was not only none of those things, he was the furthest thing in the world from those things. He was the epicenter of humility. And yet he's saying these very, very, very high things about himself and the things that he achieved. So the first thing that he wants us to know and to think about is that when we hear these things, not to respond from the place of 2022 and how we see people talk about themselves. But imagine in a shtetl in Ukraine 200-something years ago, when nobody spoke like this, that a person who was not only completely honest, but he was expert in every single level of understanding of the Torah. He was a person who had toiled day and night every day of his waking life for 38 half years to become the greatest Eved of Hashem, the greatest servant of Hashem, and the greatest shepherd of Hashem's children. That he didn't do anything for himself at all. That is the one who's saying these things about himself. And just to bolster that point, Rabbi Nachman has an amazing and very important qualifier, that how do we know that the greatest level of humility is not someone who walks around with their head down, looking disheveled, and like portraying themselves as literally, I am nothing. Rabbi Nachman actually calls this false humility. He says the real humility is the level of Moshe, where Moshe writes in the Torah that Moshe is the most humble man in the world. And Rabbi Nachman says, and we never think about this, who wrote that? Moshe wrote that. So Rabbi Nachman says, how could it be that Moshe wrote about himself, that he's the most humble man in the world? And the answer is that that's the highest level of humility. To be able to say with absolute sincerity, with absolute genuinity, with no thought of self-aggrandizement or having any type of intention or any type of desire which is under the radar, some type of plot or scheme. I am simply saying exactly the truth about myself, no matter how it sounds, no matter what it looks like. And I'm not saying this truth because I am this thing. I'm saying this because this is what Hashem gave me, and this is what it is. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu said about himself that he was the most humble man in the world, okay? So therefore, Rabbi Nachman is going to say many things about himself. And Bezrat Hashem, we should go in with the understanding that we all revere Moshe Rabbeinu. Nobody in the course of history ever denied that Moshe was the most humble man who ever lived. But not anybody ever took notice of the fact that Moshe was the one who said that about himself, okay? So therefore, that being said, there is a precedence for a person being that humble and saying things like that about themselves. And therefore, when we see it, we have to really look at ourselves and why is this turning me in a certain way? Why is this making me feel uncomfortable? Why is this turning me off maybe that Rabbi Nachman speaking about himself like that? Is it for sure 100% because of what I think about him? Or maybe it's causing a problem inside of me because I lack humility, right? And a person will notice that the more humble he becomes, the easier it is to sovel, to hear these things that Rabbi Nachman says about himself. That's one point. And then the other point, and the last point that I want to bring from Avraham Greenberg, that we kind of alluded to, is that Rav Natan, who was the main student of Rabbi Nachman, he wrote his own autobiography. Rav Natan called it Yemei Moranot, the days of our master Natan, about himself, okay? Because he was the one who took over Breslover Hasidus. He was the one who actually proliferated it in the world. There would be no Breslov Hasidus if it wasn't for Rav Natan, and that's not because Rav Natan had original ideas which created it. He was just simply the most faithful student since, all of the great faithful students in history, whether it was Rav Chaim Vital, to the Arizal, whether it was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai students to him, whether it was Rabbi Akiva students to him, whether it was Yoshua ben Nun to Moshe Rabbeinu. But he was on that level of humility and loyalty to his Rebbe to the extent that he was a pure looking glass. He was like the moon to Rabbi Nachman's son. And therefore, through Rav Natan, we have all of Rabbi Nachman's words, Torah, lessons, conversations, X, Y, and Z. So Rav Natan said about himself, these are the days of our master Rav Natan. But about Rabbi Nachman, he wrote, these are the lives of my master Rabbi Nachman. And there's an oral tradition that Rav Natan said that the reason why I say this is because for me, my life was made up of days. At the end of my life, all of my life was simply days. It adds up to days, and all those days accumulated to my life. But Rav Natan said about his master Rabbi Nachman, but every moment of my master's life was new life. And therefore it wouldn't be accurate, it wouldn't be fair to say the life of Rabbi Nachman. The only true way to explain the life of Rebbe Nachman is to say the lives of Rebbe Nachman, because Rebbe Nachman's life was true life.